Okay, folks, welcome to the second day of Gym Fest 2018. We are in Camping World Stadium right here in Orlando. We're just down the street from our main office at Gym Supply. Welcome to the second day, and you know what's going to be the best thing about today? You don't have to listen to me all day. Woo! Hey! Had enough of me yesterday, but you know what? I want to hit you this afternoon with a couple of things. You know, like I told you yesterday, we are not talking about the same things today that we talked about yesterday. So I'm glad to see some faces, and I see some, there's some other people that I saw you yesterday. We had a good conversation. The first keynote speaker for today, we have two of them for the morning. We're going to break for a tour of Gym Supply and lunch. And then this afternoon, I've got two classes for you, so it's a good day on this side of the curtain. First up today, Aaron and I had a chance to work together in Atlanta at another one of these events earlier this year. I want to introduce you to Aaron Buchko.
Very good.
PhD. I don't have those letters. Here's Aaron. Now, I'm going to let him tell you about who he is and what he does, but you know what? When I saw you first come up this morning, you were coming up just about this way. What was it you did?
I pointed at you and I said, why do we clean the floors?
Why do we clean the floor? Did you hear that yesterday? I think we talked about that. We had...
Oh man, 3 hours.
We sat at the holiday...
Let's be honest, it was a bar.
Okay, so it was a bar. And we started on a conversation.
3 hours.
Where did we end?
Right here, I think. Right about where we are right now.
And I got a feeling that we're going to do this again, right?
I hope so.
I hope so too.
I hope so, because it's a lot of fun.
Aaron Buchko.
Hey, no. Don't ever do that when the speaker starts. I might not be any good, and then you're going to feel bad, right? How are you this morning? Good. It's a nice day. I told Dutch, I said, this is the first time I can, honestly, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell everybody in Illinois, I said, man, I spoke to a crowd in a stadium. I'm like a rock star. I'm at the stadium show, you know, kind of thing. I think this is pretty cool. I am Aaron Buchko. I'm the PhD thing, Dr. Buchko sort of thing. I'll tell you my best story on that. One of my colleagues had a 5-year-old son a number of years ago, back when we had landline phones. And his son had a playmate over at the house. And they were, you know, whatever, and the phone rang, and it was one of his students calling. So his son answered the phone, and he yells upstairs, he says, Dad, they want to talk to Dr. Jones. He puts the phone down. And he goes back to playing with his little playmate, and as he's coming down the stairs, he hears his playmate say to the son, your dad's a doctor? And the son says to him, oh yeah, but he's not the kind who can do you any good. So I've always remembered that, right? Whenever people talk about that, and I always tell them, look, Aaron does quite fine, thank you, okay? So don't worry about any of that other stuff. In my other life, I'm a professor of management at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. Not the end of the world, but you can't see it from there. And I spend most of my time working with undergraduate and graduate students in the business school, primarily in the areas of management and leadership. That's kind of my domain, doing a lot of stuff with business planning and strategy and whatnot. But in the process of doing that, you start learning that you got to start thinking about the world and how the world is changing, because that's what impacts how we work, how we operate, how we run our organizations. So by default, I started messing around in this space, and all of a sudden I started putting some ideas together, and I said, you know, I'm going to start sharing this with people, and people like Dutch and others say, you know, that's kind of useful stuff. Would you mind sharing it with other groups? And I'm always happy to do that, so I thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. I apologize because you probably won't be able to read some of the stuff on the screen, so it's really there to remind me about it, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're going through right now and how your world's going to change in the not too distant future. As a matter of fact, it's changing right now, and we'll talk about that, okay? So thanks to Dutch for the invitation. I taught this, you know, prospering in turbulent times. What is turbulence? if you've ever been in an airplane, and I don't know if any of you are white-knuckle passengers anyway, okay? That's what my dad used to call them. My dad was a pilot, right? And that's what we used to call them. We called them white-knuckle, the ones that they get on the plane and they grab the seat handles and they hold on until that thing lands on the ground again. You never like it when the captain comes over the radio and he says, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to turn on the seatbelt sign. Air traffic control said there's going to be some turbulence in the area. And just out of curiosity, anybody ever been on a flight where the flight attendant hit the ceiling? Okay, I had that one. I had that one once where the plane, it just dropped and the flight attendant was in the aisle and just bang, right on the roof of the ceiling. I've had people getting sick on the plane because of the turbulence and all this. You know the problem with turbulence if you're one of those passengers, right? You don't know how long, you don't know how severe, and you have no idea when it's going to start and when it's going to stop. So you're always kind of sitting there thinking, okay, what are we going through? What I want to suggest to you is we're in a period right now of our history as people where things are pretty turbulent. It's pretty crazy out there if you haven't noticed, and if you need further proof, go home tonight and turn on the news. Okay? It's a wild situation we're in. Yes, we could talk about that. We're not going to spend a lot of time there. I want to talk to you about what's changing our world in organizations. Okay? Think about some of the stuff that's going on out there today, all right? There are some really interesting statistics out there if you pay attention to this kind of stuff, which I'm very fortunate, very blessed I get paid to do. 90% of all the scientists who've ever lived are alive today. Did you know that? 90% of all the scientists who ever lived are alive today. And by the way, 95% of all the computer scientists who've ever lived are alive today. Okay? So you can begin to see some of the changes that are coming in technology and science as a result of that type of thing. Think about how organizations are fundamentally being challenged today. Uber, anybody here? I noticed last night when we came in to the airport that, there used to be the taxi stands, and there's this woman next to me and she's got her luggage, and about that time the lift car shows up at the airport. She called, as soon as that plane hit, she's called for a lift, the lift car shows up, she gets on, she moves. Uber is now the largest taxi company service in the world. Did you know that? Uber is the largest taxi service company in the world, but they own no vehicles. Now think about that. They will give more rides today to more people than any other taxi service in the world, but they don't own a single vehicle. Airbnb is going to rent more rooms this weekend than any hotel chain in the world. Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, doesn't matter. Airbnb is going to rent more rooms this weekend than any of those hoteliers, but they don't own any property. How is that possible? How can you be the largest in the world and own nothing? We all come from a background where you had to have stuff. These people are doing it and they got nothing. Watson, IBM's Watson computer. It's already won at Jeopardy. They thought it was going to take it about 3 years to master the ancient Chinese game of Go. Watson did it in about 3 months. And it already gives better legal advice than most lawyers do through artificial intelligence today. Television. Boy, we all grew up with the tube, right? TV. Have you seen how television is? When the internet came out, they said the biggest thing, I remember my broker saying to me, listen, don't buy any of those Cisco or any of the hardware companies. You want to own the content because that's going to be secure. That's an industry that's going to be around forever. The first two industries disrupted by the internet, music and television. The most creative industries in the US. As soon as the iPod came out, music industry got turned on its ear. And now, with streaming TV, do you know I've got students who purposely don't watch a single episode so they can binge watch at the end. Why would I sit there and want to watch a weekly television show? I'll just wait till it's all over. I'll watch 12 straight hours of Game of Thrones, which is what they do. 12 straight hours of Game of Thrones, no commercials. It's great. They cocoon all day in their house. They sit there with their TV, and all they do is they watch. This is their life, right? But Netflix, right? Streaming television. And the big thing they've been trying to get around is live sports. This has always been the hook, see? You can stream all this other stuff, you can get all this programming on Netflix, but you can't get live sports. Hulu is about to break that. So what happens to the TV industry in an environment like that? I apologize if you can't see it. That little thing down there at the bottom, those were the two finalists in Qualcomm's Tricorder Prize. Qualcomm does something every 2 or 3 years. They call it the X Prize. Qualcomm Industries gives out $10 million prizes to people who come up with new technology to do this. Those two devices down there were the finalists in the project, and they're right in trials right now, in clinical trials out in California. What the tricorder does is it diagnoses 13 common diseases and illnesses, and then it does like 3 or 4 other specialty ones that they had to pick. The point is, you don't need to go to an urgent care anymore. Urgent cares are going to be reduced to primarily what they call stitches and casts. If you broke something, if you got a major cut and you got to go get it stitched up, you'll go to an urgent care center. But if you wake up in the morning and, oh man, I got a sore throat, I wonder what it is. Here, go put your finger in, breathe into the tube. The tricorder will tell you what you got. What happens to the healthcare industry when we don't have to go to see the doctor for those types of calls anymore? And the tricorder has to cost less than $400. It's coming out at $399.99. I mean, imagine what's going to happen, right? The whole industry is being turned on their heads when we think about this kind of stuff. Automated cars will be in dealer showrooms in 2020. Self-driving cars will be in the dealer showrooms within the next 2 years. Now think about what that means, okay? Why would anybody want to own a car? Do you know if you've got a child under the age of 5 and you live in a major urban area like Orlando, there's a 50-50 chance they'll never have a driver's license. And for those of us who grew up, remember, the driver's license was your ticket, wasn't it? Yes. This was freedom, baby. I don't need mom or dad anymore, right? I mean, that was a big deal for us. Why? The car, you don't need a license. Mom and dad will have the autonomous vehicle. Where do you need to go? Go tell the car will take you there. By the way, messes you up, right? Because when you're out on that date, and mom and dad says, no, get them home by 9 o'clock. You'll be home by 9 o'clock, okay? But, you know, when we think about autonomous vehicles like that, but think about this too, though. Just down the road from us in Peoria, we've got State Farm Insurance in Bloomington. They are already having conversations. They're already trying to figure out, what does this mean when people don't need car insurance anymore? Because it's going to be autonomous. The computer's running the vehicle. We don't need to buy car insurance. What are we going to do with 250,000 extra people a year who aren't getting killed or injured on the roads? We're not even thinking about that. We're not even talking about that. Companies like GEM are excited because right behind the autonomous car comes the autonomous truck. What's the number one issue that every truck transportation company has today? Drivers. When you drive down the highway, what do you see on the back of the truck, right? Drive for us, dial 1-800, be a truck driver, whatever it happens to be, right? We won't need them. The truck will take care of it. The truck will be autonomous. What are you going to do with 1.75 million Americans whose only marketable skill is the fact that they got a CDL license? What are we going to do with them? Oh, we don't know. It'll just start happening. Trust us, right? We're not even having these conversations. And the technology is coming faster than we can deal with it. What's going to happen to real estate when people no longer have to worry about the commute? Because the automated car is going to make sure no more. Now, the good news, no more tie-ups on I-4. Because Because the computer picks it up, the computer automatically adjusts the flow of the traffic. We don't have to worry about it anymore. But when we don't have to worry about the commute, what does that do for urban areas? How does that affect the real estate market when it's no longer, I don't have to worry about where I live because my transportation problem's been solved for me by the intelligence of the vehicle itself? There's going to be more solar energy, whether you like it or not. The money that the government has poured in over the years, the subsidies they've put into solar energy, have now made it a viable prospect And I don't know if, I'm sure you're getting it down here in Florida because you get a lot more sun than we get up in central Illinois, but when they're building homes now, half the home is roofed with shingles, the other half of the home is solar panels, and they're going off the grid. Why would I want to tie into a utility company when I can put the solar on top of the house and I can take care of my energy needs that way? There will be now, as a result of that, by the way, because of solar power and energy becoming more readily available, there's going to be water. We're going to solve the fundamental problem of most societies, which is water. What's the problem with Africa? Water. It's not that they don't have arable land, they don't have water. But you know the old saying, do you know we have more water than we can possibly ever use or consume? The problem is 90% of it's got salt in it. It's in the oceans. So you got to desalinate it. What's the problem with desalination? It takes a lot of energy to desalinate water. But when energy suddenly becomes inexpensive, what happens? All of a sudden now we've got access to water. Now we can pump the water inland. All of a sudden that land that's sitting there in Africa now becomes arable land. We've solved the problem. We've taken care of the farming problem for people when we do that. Right? And this is not Buck Rogers in the 21st century. This is happening right now as we're sitting here. Farmers in Germany are making more money putting solar panels on the roofs of their barns than they are farming. They get more money for creating energy than they do for farming the food itself, because they've figured out the technology behind this. We're also doing 3D printing of human tissue. Forget 3D printing. Everyone thought 3D printing was cool. My son's a hockey player. He just got this new pair of skates where he had to put his foot on this panel, and the guy moves this iPad around, you know, and these skates are built from the bottom up for his foot, and it's really cool and everything like that. Hey, that's old technology. They're now talking about 3D printing with human tissue. So you got a problem, your kidneys are failing, we're going to print you a new kidney. You got a problem with your liver, we're going to print you a new liver. And your body won't reject it because it'll be based on your genetic material. Do you know, I kid you not, people that look at this that are really thinking about the future have said the first person who's going to live to be 200 is alive right now. I hope it's not me. I really don't want to live that long, okay? I just don't. It's not good. But the first person to live to 200 is alive. You think Social Security is in trouble right now. Wait until people retire, think they're going to retire at 65, and then they're going to collect 140 years of Social Security. We're dead. I mean, this is not going to happen, all right? We've got facial recognition software now that can detect people's moods, that can tell you when people are lying. In my fantasy world, they're going to use this facial recognition software in 2020 at the presidential debates. This is my dream, right? That when they go to have these presidential debates, they're going to read the face and they're going to say lying. Imagine if they would have had that a couple weeks ago in Washington. You know, figure out who's lying and who's telling the truth just off the facial recognition software. That'd really mess them up, wouldn't it? Education. Got people here that are tied to the education market. What's going to happen now when smartphones allow people to download every educational opportunity that a student in the United States has, now going to be available to every student anywhere in the world because they can get it on a smartphone? What does that do for our educational system when people have got access to all of the curricular materials anywhere they want? Wow. I mean, yeah, we're not even, and we're not even thinking about this. We're not even talking about it. You know, we're just, well, you know, it'll be rough. Going to be rough. 70 to 80% of the jobs that are out there today, it is estimated, are going to disappear or be changed as we move to a digital economy. And we're just kind of thinking, well, we'll get there, right? Give us enough time, something good will happen. In addition, think about some of the fundamental social changes that are happening in our society. Demographics. I'm a baby boomer. I'm on the way out. We crossed a threshold. We crossed a threshold in 2015. Millennials are now the largest single cohort in the U.S. workforce. They are the largest single cohort in the U.S. workforce. And coming behind them, we'll talk about them a little bit here this morning too, is iGen. The first iGen students enrolled as freshmen this year at Bradley, but that means the ones that aren't going to college are now being hired. You're hiring an 18-year-old, you're now hiring iGen. And iGen's even different from millennials. And we'll talk about that a little bit here in a second. Fundamental social structures being changed in our society. right? We're going through a whole scale. Do you know for the first time in our history as a nation, we've got, I have to assume when I walk into a classroom at Bradley, that most of those students sitting in that classroom have spent all or a great part of their childhood in a single parent situation. Do you know we've never had that statistic demographically in human history? It's never happened until the last 20 years. That's reality, all right? That's the world that we're dealing in today. We've got this thing today too called tribalism, driven by internet and internet technology, where our affiliations now, see, when I was a kid growing up, your network, you know what your social network was? Your neighbors. The kids we hung out with, right? People we played with down the street. So it was Terry next door and Mark and Mike Tattaglia, and that was my social network. I'm on Facebook. I have no idea what my social network looks like. I know there's a lot, right? But let's talk about my kids for just a moment. Friends in the neighborhood? Who needs friends in the neighborhood? I'm friends with 50,000 people online. That's my social network. But as a result of that, who are you friends with? Why were we friends with people in our neighborhood? Because we were probably very similar in terms of socioeconomic background, right? Because we all lived in the same area, so we probably had similar socioeconomic qualities or characteristics. And so we thought alike, and we acted alike, and that was our network. Now my network is 50,000 people strong, but it's all people who think like me. And what are we doing on Facebook? We're reinforcing each other, and now we're creating tribes. The problem is those tribes are starting to do this. You wonder why we've got such bitter politics today? I hate you, you hate me, and we have to hate you. Because that's what we're saying on Facebook is, it's not enough to sit there and say, I disagree with them. They got to be the evil Satan. And we're reinforcing that in social media, and we're just driving people apart into these isolated tribes. I'll tell people, I say, you don't believe in tribalism. All you had to do is be up in Chicago, Illinois 2 years ago, right about this time, when the Cubs won the World Series. You want to see tribes, all right? All you had to do was see the Chicago Cubs tribe. It was great. The camera, I remember the camera panning what was going on outside Wrigley Field. Didn't matter the color of your skin, your ethnicity, what your gender. Nothing mattered except one thing. Did you have something that was blue and red with that C on it? If you had blue and red C, let me buy you a drink. Come on, isn't this great? It was a party in the streets around the Cubs. The next day, if I saw you in the street, I'd ignore you. But not that night. We were all part of the same tribe. Man, we were celebrating. We were world champions. That's what we've become. A nation of tribes. And it's starting to we're starting to see the impacts of that. And this is always the point where I sit there and I say, and I wish I could tell you that we've got the solution for it. We don't. We don't. Because we've never been here before. So we're making the rules up as we go along, folks, but it's a little scary. In addition to that, we're going through some fundamental economic disruptions. Think about what we've gone through as people, as human beings, right? We start out as an agricultural society. We knew once that industrial stuff came in, that was the end of the world as we know it. But what happened? We transferred people from the agricultural sector to the industrial sector. And so the people who used to grow the crops in the south moved up to the industrial cities of the north where they could build the machinery that the farmers in the south were now using. My son and I just golfed last Sunday at TPC Moline, home of John Deere. And there's a story, they tell you the whole story in there about John Deere and building the self-scouring plow and how that really revolutionized what we did in agriculture. But it created a whole industrial economy. That lasted until about the 1960s. In the 1960s, we suddenly began to automate industry. And so now what are we going to do with all these industrial workers because of factory automation? We put them into the service sector, hospitality, education, right? Financial. We moved them into the service sector, no problem. We were able to absorb those workers. We are now, I believe, in the presence of another shift of that magnitude economically. We are shifting from a service-based economy to an information-based economy. Here's the problem. What do you do with low-skilled agricultural workers in an industrial economy? You put them in low-skill industrial jobs. What do you do with low-skill industrial workers in a service-based economy? You put them in low-skill service-based jobs. What do you do with low-skill workers in an information economy? We have no place for them. We saw it yesterday when we were coming here in St. Louis Airport at the Burger King, where you order and pay at the kiosk. And all those Burger King workers, which used to be the great starting job. I mean, my sister started out at McDonald's in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Don't need them anymore. If you're not plugged into the information economy, what do we do? And we haven't got an answer for that. We're trying to figure it out as we go along. Thank goodness our economy is expanded right now. Thank goodness it's expanded and allowed us to be able to provide employment situations for people. Because otherwise we'd be really hurting. Because we're going through a fundamental shift in our world and our society. Primarily driven by this information thing, knowledge has now become completely transformed in our world, if you think about it, right? We all now have all the information we need, more information we can possibly use, instantly available to us on our cell phone. I mean, how many times have you been out to dinner with somebody has a question, what do? You Google it. You know? Let's see, I wonder how the city of Chicago got its name. We were sitting out I remember last week, my wife and I were just having dinner, and somebody came up and I wonder how Chicago, what is that? What is Chicago? What does that mean? I got my cell phone, let's find out what Chicago means. Right? It's there. Anything you want. Right? It's available but as a result of that, we all expect it now. And we think it should be there. And we're disappointed when it's not. What do you mean the service guy's going to show up between noon and 5? I want to know when the service guy's going to show up at my house to take care of this problem, because technology's convinced me I should be able to do it. Hey, I can tell you where the package is. FedEx allows me to tell you, or UPS. I go on my app. I know exactly where that package is and what time it's going to show up at my house. And it's creating greater demand, greater need for people, right? This feeding off of the information and the knowledge that information provides. This is disruptive, right? This is not a moderate change. This is disruption. Think about what happens online in 60 seconds. I realize you probably can't read some of that chart, but let me just sort of, just to put it in perspective for you. Here's what's going on online in every 60 seconds. There are 3.3 million Facebook posts. There are 1.8 million Google searches. 448,000 Twitters. 66,972 Instagram feeds. 500 minutes of YouTube are being uploaded. Every minute. So if you sit here with your watch and you go 60 seconds, as we're sitting here, there were 3.3 million emails that transferred across the internet during that 60 seconds. Now multiply that by what's going on in a day. And think about how information and knowledge is moving in our world and how fast it's being transformed. And that's just in 60 seconds. Every 60 seconds. 500 minutes of YouTube video. I mean,
I'm trying to add to it all.
You're adding to it, but it's being crowded with everything else that's coming in. YouTube, by the way, is now the second largest search engine in the world, behind Google. Because we're all looking for that video feed. Give me that entertainment, right? It's funny. I remember a number of years ago, there was a comedian doing a sketch, a routine. He was talking about magazines. And by the way, one of my jobs was in the magazine industry. And he was talking about magazines. And he said, when I was young, the magazines had these big themes like time and life. He said, and then there were magazines that were about people. And then that wasn't good enough. We had to have a magazine about us. And if you've been to a newsstand, you know that these are all magazine titles. And then he said, I think what's going to happen in the future is there will be a magazine and it'll be about me. My top 10 vacation spots. My favorite restaurants. At the time, we thought this was a comedy routine that this guy was doing. You know what I tell people today? We have it. It's called Facebook. My best friend was telling me his daughter-in-law is very active on Facebook. He said, I don't get this stuff. She's a triathlete. He says she gets up in the morning, she goes out, she comes back from her run. First thing she does, she gets on Facebook, had a great run today. Super breakfast. Why do I care? He said, why do I care? But because I'm friends with her on Facebook, guess what? I get a notification every time she does one of these things. We have a magazine. It's all about who? It's all about me. And we're becoming individuals as a result of that. We're isolating ourselves from each other because it's all about me. This is what we grew up with. This is what we learned. That's just in 60 seconds online. So if you sit here and you think today for just a moment, what are the 3 biggest issues, forces, or factors that are going to change your business, change your customers, change your organization in the next 3 years? And think about the potential magnitude of the change that we're facing. Okay? Because change is going to happen, whether you want it to or not. I want you to meet Mr. Steve Sasson. Steve Sasson is the gentleman on the left there. Steve Sasson is the engineer at Kodak who got the U.S. patent for digital photography. That's right. Kodak patented digital photography. They came up with the technology. And they looked at it and they said, shoot, if this stuff takes off, people won't need paper, they won't need chemicals, they won't need film. We don't want to mess with this stuff. Anybody interested in it? And so they licensed the patent to Nikon, Minolta, Canon. And now Kodak has sold off their intellectual property. And once upon a time, and most looking around the room at some of the ages here, we're all old enough to remember when Kodak was one of the top 2 global brands. The 2 top global brands in the world were Coca-Cola and Kodak. You couldn't go to a Walmart, to a Piggly Wiggly, you couldn't go to a Walgreens checkout without that little yellow box being at the checkout stand. And they're gone. Gone. Because they thought they were in the photography business. They're not in the photography business. They were in the image business. What's the number 1 camera in the world today? iPhone. There are more pictures and more images will be taken a day with an iPhone than any other camera in the world. So it's going to happen, right? We can't sit here and say, stop the world, I want to get off. Change is going to happen. What are we going to do with it, right? That's the real challenge that we're going to face. If you think about the types of innovation, what's unique here is we're going through a whole new era of innovation where we're innovating based upon information. Used to be, way back when, Alexander Graham Bell, who disappears on the screen, Alexander Graham Bell, that was the innovation of stuff, where you created new physical products, okay? Henry Ford's Model T up there, the Model T wasn't the innovation. There were over 300 people manufacturing horseless carriages when Henry Ford introduced the Model T. You know what the innovation was? Process innovation, the assembly line. So we went from product innovation to process innovation to JetBlue, which is service innovation. But look at where we are today, where innovation is now packed around bits and bytes of data, around information. That's innovation today. What information have you got for me? How can you tell me something that will help me do my job better? Give me something that's new, that's unique, that's novel, that intrigues me, and I'll do business with you. I'll become part of your network, part of your organization. And by the way, as soon as you don't, I'm going to leave you that quick. We could complain about this and say, oh, it's not the world I grew up in, or we could say, this is the world we're in. What are we going to do about it? I like this little chart. I know you can't read it, but I love this little chart because it's a reminder of how, when you talk about how things change, because most of this is, again, looking around the room here, this is during our lifetime. That's the video game industry from 1980 to about 2005. And every time you see a new color, that's a new video game platform being introduced, and every time that color disappears, that's when that video game platform disappears. Does anybody still have their Sega Genesis? Just out of curiosity. All right. You know what I still have at home? I kid you not. I'm keeping this. This is going to be in a museum someplace. I have Pong. Does anybody, you remember Pong? Right? Pong, the great Pong machines. Sears sold this thing and you had to hook it up to your TV and we could play Pong. We thought, and when Atari came out, oh man, that Atari 2600, this was high tech. Man, I walk in the room now, my son is playing FIFA 19, soccer, and he's working on his moves. Man, I was just happy moving the joystick, He's working on his moves. I got this great move. Dad, look at this. I got this killer move for scoring a goal in soccer. He said, why don't you get out on the soccer, field and see if you can really do something with that? Oh, no, right? Online, I'm a stud. Online, I am big time. Okay? My gosh. Look what that industry's gone through in 20 years. Whole new platforms and products came up. They were big. They disappeared. I mean, that's our world, right?
What's the first one, the one that comes things all along, the light?
Light blue at the top. Well, but it dies off in about 2000. Okay. You know what those are? Those are arcade games in your bar.
Oh, in the bar.
Remember the big arcade games? Space Invaders?
Yes.
Right?
Asteroids,
Missile Command, Asteroids, and then Pac-Man. Was there anything better than Pac-Man, right? When you think about that industry, fascinating stuff. The important thing about this chart, when you look at it, is to notice this is at the bottom of the chart, we've got about 1910 up to about 2000, and you notice that there's these little break points, and then you got a little scale here type of thing. What that chart actually is, that chart's the men's high jump record. What in the world does the Olympic high jump record have to do with innovation and technology? It has everything to do with innovation and technology. Back in the 1900s, early 1900s, they did something called the scissors kick. That was how you competed in the high jump. You ran up to the bar, you basically somersaulted over the bar, but as you got up, you kicked your feet back and forth together like a pair of scissors to try to get a little extra to get you over the bar. That was how we competed in the high jump. Okay? And it was a huge advantage to be tall to be in the high jump. But long about the 1924 Olympic Games in Paris, the Americans, because back then America was considered the West, all right, the Americans introduced something called the Western roll. So they when they came up to the bar, they would sort of roll themselves over the bar, and they got a little extra height, and you can see what happened when they did that. All of a sudden, the record moved significantly. That's going to get you through about the 1956 games, when they created this device called a technique called the straddle. And when I was in high school, we were straddlers. Okay? In the straddle, if this is the high jump bar, and I'm a right-hander, in the straddle, you run up to the bar, I'm a right-hander, so I plant my left foot, I throw the right leg up, and I roll like this as I go over the bar. I'm straddling the bar, and then you pick up the trailing leg as you clear the bar. And if you're a male competing in the high jump, you only fail to pick up that trailing leg one time. And you never forget to pick up the trailing leg the rest of your career. I assure you, all right? You only straddle once and miss, and you know this is not a good thing to do. So long about the 1960 games, there's this guy, and he wants to be a high jumper. His problem is he's about 5'10". The high jumpers are all 6'4" and 6'5", but he's only 5'10", and he wants to be a high jumper. Not a great career move, probably, for him, okay? But he's thinking, I want to be in the high jump. And he's looking at it, and he can't compete because he doesn't have it. And he says to himself one more day as he's looking at it, he says, I wonder what would happen if I went over the bar backwards. His name was Richard Fosbury, Dick Fosbury. He created what's called the FosburyFlop. And today, everybody flops. But here's the issue, right? For the flop, if you're like me, a right-hander, you start on the opposite side of the pit, you run up, you plant the right leg, you go up like this. As you go over the bar, you pick up both feet to be able to clear it. That's how you compete in the high jump. When the flop came in, what happened to all of the straddlers? They were out, gone, couldn't compete. You sit there and you look at that and you think, well, that can't be right. These are world-class athletes. They just changed their technique, didn't they? No, here's the problem. All of my training, all of my work, all of my timing is based upon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plant kick up over. Suddenly I got to go over here, and I got to run up the opposite way, and I'm planting the wrong foot. My muscular system is all wrong. I can't compete. That's the issue with disruption. When disruption hits us, it takes out the people who can no longer compete in the game, because we put all of our systems, all of our structures, all of our routines in place around that one very specific technique. And when you're in disruptive change like we're in today, you can't sit there and say, well, I'll just take what I'm doing and do it better. No, we've changed the technique. You have to change your technique if you're going to stay in the game and be successful. The problem is, the growth that we're in right now is what we call exponential growth. The change that we're going through is a rate of change unlike we've ever experienced in human history. And we're not good at understanding exponential growth. There's a wonderful story that's told about a mathematician who introduced the game of chess into India. And the Maharaja was so taken with the game of chess, he loved the game of chess. He was playing chess constantly. This was such a big thing for him. And he wanted to reward the mathematician for bringing him this wonderful gift of chess. So he goes to the mathematician, he says, what would you like? Anything you want, up to 1/3 of my kingdom you can have. The mathematician thought about it a little bit, and he said, you know, I'd like some rice. Now, India at the time, centuries ago, right, food was an issue for them, so rice would have been important. He says, I'd like some rice. And the Maharaja was a little bit disappointed that, you know, the mathematician only asked for rice. But the mathematician said, but I'd like the rice in a very special way. You like chess, I want you to think of a chessboard. So on the first piece there, 1 grain of rice. On the second square, 2 grains of rice. On the third square, 4 grains of rice. Exponential growth, see? 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. So the Maharaja thinks, no problem. You shall have it. Until he realized, do you know what 2 to the 64th power is? He would have to have a mountain of rice approximately the size of Mount Everest to be able to fill the last square on the chessboard. And the Maharaja was so upset when he discovered this that he did what all leaders do. He had the mathematician killed for asking him, you know, for presenting such an unreasonable request to him. But the point is, of that whole illustration is, our mind doesn't think in terms of exponential growth. Our mind is trained to think in terms of linear growth and change. When things start changing this rapidly, that's when we get the hockey stick. This is a chart that someone put together that shows significant inventions in the world since about 2000, 3000 BC up until the modern age. Look at how it accelerates. Anybody watch The Big Bang Theory? You notice that montage they do at the beginning of the show where they talk about, you know, the changes that have occurred? Look at how much of that change has happened within the last 50 years and how it's transformed our world. We're in the hockey stick. And we're trying to come to grips with that as human beings, and we're not very good at it because as human beings, our mind doesn't want to operate that way. So, where do we face the greatest challenges today in adapting to change? Which of these concepts are going to be most essential for your organization in the future to be able to adapt to the changes that we're going through today? What's keeping us back? Here's what we do as human beings. We have resources that are available to us. We'll structure those resources in various ways, and we attach processes to those structures. So we create what are called systems. And over time, as we work those systems, they become routines. Now, routines are very important to us because they enable us to get things done without thinking about it. We don't have to spend mental energy, we just fall into the routine. How many of you got a routine for doing the dishes? How many of you got a routine for doing the bed? How many of you got a routine that you go through in the morning when you wake up, right? We got them, right? And they're useful, and they're helpful, and they help us be efficient. You want to mess with yourself sometime? Change your routine. And I got a quote, and I quote this guy when I'm doing this presentation right here. I quote Dutch because it's such a beautiful illustration of people. Tomorrow morning, when you go to get dressed, step in with the opposite leg. Step into your pants with the opposite leg. I'm telling you, you will be so messed up, right? I'm a right leg person, right? I go put my right leg goes first. Sit there and try to put the left leg in first. The rest of the day, I'm going like this, trying to figure out, man, my pants feel wrong, right? Just because I screwed up my routine. Any of you who are married, you have routines that you're still doing that you established in the first 30 days of your married life, and you're still working those same routines. Who makes the bed in our house? Right here. Right here. Okay? Because within the first 30 days, I'd lived alone before we got married. I get up, I make my bed. We got married, I got up, I made the bed. Now, guess who makes the bed? I get up, he makes the bed. I go out of town for 2 days. I come back, bed's still sitting there waiting to be made because he's not there. That's the routine. Right?
You know what you're going home for, right?
I just when I get home, I know it'll be there. That's the routine. This type of disruptive change breaks the whole system down and threatens our routines. And now we're feeling really put off because I'm out of my routine. I've lost the flow. What do I do? That's the world we're in today. How is your world changing? Your customers, the people you serve, how are they changing? What are they going to want in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years that you're going to have to provide to them? How are they changing the rules of the game? Because that's what's happening here, right? This isn't like we're getting better. This isn't like the problem that, the NFL is having a problem right now because the players have gotten bigger, faster, stronger, and so now we've got more severe injuries. We've got this whole concussion protocol that we're worried about. We get that. But this isn't like changing, this isn't like the players are getting bigger, faster, stronger. This is like we're changing the entire game. We're going to completely change and transform the rules. That's what we're talking about here. So it's no longer enough to say we're going to get more efficient, we're going to get more effective, we're going to be faster, that's not enough anymore. We have to talk about how we're going to change the entire model of how we operate. And that completely shatters all of our existing routines. We don't like that. There's the chart, by the way. I'm going to highlight this one for you. There's the chart about demographics. Okay? And you can see baby boomers, that's me. We're that top line, and we're tailing off. Millennials, that's that dark line at the bottom. They just became the largest cohort in the U.S. workforce. And they're an interesting group. What do we know about them? There's me, the baby boomers. We're that bulge at the top. That's males and females by age. So you can see the U.S. population. There's the baby boomers. Behind us came those of you that are Gen X. You're the baby bust. That's what they called you, the baby bust. Okay? There weren't as many kids being born, so that's why it shrinks. Look at the millennials behind them. There's the bulge again, right? That's why they're the largest cohort in the workforce. And behind them at the tail end now, iGen. The 18-year-olds that are just coming online, born in 2000. By the way, you want to know something about iGen? These 18-year-olds that will be starting employment with you or working with you in the near future, their phones have always been smart. Okay? Their phones have always been smart. They don't know what it is to just even have a plain cell phone. Remember the ones we used to wear on our hips? We thought were so cool, man. We could just whip those things out like it was a gun. My phone rang. And then we got the flip phone. That was really neat, right? Now we're all using, their phones have always been smart. They cannot tell you where they were on 9/11. They weren't born. They don't remember it. Arguably one of the biggest single events in our lifetimes. We can all if I asked anybody in this room, where were you when you heard the news about 9/11? You'd tell me.
Me, I was working.
Right? Yeah, I was too. I was sitting in an office in Caterpillar. No work was getting done at Caterpillar. Everybody was in the conference room watching television. Single biggest event. Ask the 18-year-olds that you're hiring right now where they were on 9/11. I don't know. It might as well be ancient history to them. They have no recollection. Right? And these are the people that we're going to be hiring to work for us. Okay? Just recognize that they're going to be different as a result of that. There's an old saying, what you are is what you were, and there's good evidence for this. The basic values you're going to hold as a human being are basically shot into you by the age 3, and the scary thing is you don't remember it. You don't remember what was happening to you at age 3 and 4. Most people's first conscious memory is age 4. But the basic values you're going to hold as a human being were shaped by the world you were living in when you were 3, 4 years old, right? Think about what's happened in the world. I apologize that you can't see that, but it's a great timeline. Think about what was happening in the world and how that shaped these generations. So break them down a little bit. Those of us that are baby boomers, all right, boomers in the room, you'll relate to these. 1955, Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of the bus. That was going on in our lifetime, right? First nuclear power plant came online in 57. Kennedy was elected in 60. The Cuban Missile Crisis was 62. Martin Luther King's March on Washington was 63. Also in 63, President Kennedy was assassinated. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 64. In 65, American troops entered Vietnam. And those of us who were late baby boomers, the best thing was in 69, we had Woodstock and the Summer of Love. Right? Yeah, those were good times, I think. I don't remember them. But they told me it was great, right? What are we like as a result of that? Those of us that are boomers, right? What are some of the basic values that baby boomers picked up? We tend to be anti-war. We tend to be anti-government. You can't trust them. They lied to us about Vietnam. We don't trust those people, okay? We believe in equal opportunity, because we came of age during the time when that was important in our society. We tend to be optimistic because the world was getting better. We believe in personal growth and development. We're sort of cynical. We question everything. We like our youth. That's why we join health clubs. Hey, never trust anyone over 30. Never trust anyone over 30. That's what we grew up with, right? Come on, I had Roger Daltrey and the Who singing "Hope I Die Before I Get Old." I mean, this was, this was rock and roll. This is, when I started out in business, I started out selling rock and roll. So, I mean, this is my I may be old, but I got to hear all the really good bands. Never forget that. Gen Xers in the room. The next cohort. Gen Xers in the room. So you started out when the troops were in Vietnam. Sesame Street came on in 1969. The Equal Rights Amendment was 1972. Roe v. Wade was 1973. Watergate was 74. Dual income households became predominant in the U.S. in 75. The energy crisis was 1973 through 79 under President Carter. And the tail end of the Gen Xers, Apple introduced the Macintosh in 84. The Challenger blew up in 86. What did Gen Xers learn based upon how they grew up? Balance. They rejected the baby boomers, their parents working. They wanted a balanced lifestyle. Diversity is important to them. They have very high job expectations. They're independent. They lack organizational loyalty. They seek life balance, very self-reliant. They think globally. What about these millennials? What happened to the millennials? Black Monday was in 1987, but most of them don't remember it. The Berlin Wall came down in 89. The Gulf War was 1990. The World Wide Web was introduced that same year. Digital cellular phones were introduced in 93. Oklahoma City bombing was 95. President Clinton was impeached in 98. Columbine was 99. What did they learn as a result of that? Very achievement-oriented. They're avid consumers. They like to buy stuff. Diversity is fundamental to them. They don't like fun. They like extreme fun. The X Games came about through the millennials, okay? Very tolerant of differences in others, okay? Sociable, see themselves as members of a global community, very techno-savvy, right? Because of what they were learning, because of what they were going through. We are just starting to see the first data on iGen. They're just starting to report it. You know what was interesting about the first data set that I saw, that I read? Do you know who iGen looks like right now? You got to go back even before that. Believe it or not, they're now saying that iGen looks like Depression children. My parents, who grew up during the Depression, they said iGeners starting to look like them. They're very frugal. They work hard. Why? What's been the biggest thing that's impacted these iGen kids? The Great Recession. The Great Recession. They're not taking anything for granted. College enrollment is declining for them. Why? Because college is too expensive. I want to go out and I want to work. I don't want to get saddled with all that debt. I mean, this is a fundamental change, folks, right? And these are the people you're going to be hiring. They always tell you, don't talk about religion and politics, right? So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about politics and religion, okay? We'll do it that way. Millennials are less conservative as a cohort than any of the previous generations. They are far more liberal. This is data from the Pew Research Center. It's not me. This is what Pew says, all right? They are far more liberal than any other generation in human history. They have far less religious affiliation. Millennials are far lower in terms of their religious affiliation than any other generation that we've had in the U.S. You can look at the data that's here. This does, therefore, impact their behavior and what they do. Millennials get married later in life. They put off marriage. They will cohabitate before they get married. So they will put off marriage in order to be able to do that. They love technology. They think any piece of technology, as far as they're concerned, makes their life better. Right? They're not afraid of it like some of us boomers were. Where do they get their information? Those of us that are boomers, you know where we get our information? TV news, and we actually read newspapers. Where do you think millennials get most of their information? Facebook. Remember what I said before about tribalism? Do you want to understand why people are so isolated from each other and so angry with each other today? Because when all I get is information from people who are saying the same thing as me, and one of the things they're saying is, and the rest of those people are all bad, what do you think my impression is? Okay? As a result, they are far less trusting than any generation in human history. Think about this for just a moment, right? Boomers. First president we remember was probably Kennedy. The early boomers remember Eisenhower. Ike, the happy warrior. Kennedy. What was Kennedy for us? Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We choose to put a man on the moon and do the other great things, right? Possibilities, optimism. That was Kennedy. Who's the first president that Gen Xers remember? Nixon. Nixon. I'm not a crook. Oh yeah, you are. Okay? And they don't trust government. And you wonder why they don't trust government? The first one that millennials remember is who? You said it. Clinton. Now think for just a moment of how these groups feel about leadership. Our world, leadership was Kennedy and King. For Xers, leadership was Nixon and Carter. For millennials, it's Clinton. So we went from the president, let's do the great things, to the president will stand on national TV and lie to your face. And you wonder why they don't trust people. This is their image, right? This is what they learned. And so now, when you tell them to do something, well, why? Why am I doing this? Because it's not enough to say to them, because I'm the boss. Because that doesn't mean anything, because you'll stand up there and you'll lie to me in order to get what you want. I've seen it happen in Washington. And that's what we're dealing with in our workplace today, okay? So as a result, they're very different. Their lifestyle's very different. My generation, the boomers, we were the first ones to see divorce. Right? Gen Xers, you were the first latchkey kids. Dual income households. Millennials? Oh my gosh. Millennials are blended families. Right? I mean, my son's fiance, soon-to-be wife, is a prototype of that. Right? Christmas at our house, we get up, we go to church, we come home, we open presents, we hang out together. Pretty simple. Christmas at her house, we get up, we open presents with my mom and my one sister. Then we go over to this parents' home, because this is my mom's second husband, we open presents there. Then we go to this grandparent's house for the third Christmas. Then we do this grandparent's house for the fourth Christmas. Then I go over to my dad's house at 6 o'clock at night for Christmas dinner. I said, Jesse, you must be exhausted. I don't know how you get through Christmas, but that's a blended family. We were the cleavers. We're boomers. We were the cleavers from Leave It to Beaver. My Millennials, Modern Family. That's why they watch that show. All right? It's different in their lifestyle, and that lifestyle difference comes out in the way they work and their expectations from the workplace. And you're all living with that, because you're all dealing with a whole new set of expectations from the workplace that you've never had to deal with before. We were happy to have a job. Once we got a job, we wanted to have a career. Now when you talk to the students about it, well, you know, I think I'm going to go out and I'm probably going to do this for a couple of years, and then I'm going to do that for a few years, and then I want to try this for a few years. Really? You don't want to develop a long-term career with it? No, not me. That's not the way. And by the way, please understand when I talk about them, doesn't mean they're good or bad, right or wrong. They're different. They're just different. And that's okay. But we got to deal with that in our organizations. So how do we do that? Again, wait until iGen comes into us now. They're frugal, less optimistic, hardworking. Believe it or not, iGen people resent millennials. They think millennials are lazy. All right? They had everything handed to them. I got to work. They had everything handed to them. So you're seeing that kind of resentment that's occurring, and look a lot like Depression-era children in terms of their behavior and how they're reacting in the marketplace. What do you do? Here's the biggest single thing I can tell you, because I wish I could give you now the 10-step, 12-step, 15-step process to deal with this. I can't. We're making up the rules, but there's one thing we do know about the workplace, okay? I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we're in a great time of economic growth. The bad news is we're in a great time of economic growth. So the good news is the economy's growing. The bad news is people now have got jobs. Wage rates are being bid up. And you probably saw the piece this week that Amazon, God bless Amazon, they have decided out of the goodness of their hearts that they're going to pay people $15 an hour to work at Amazon fulfillment centers. And of course, politically, this gets latched onto as, aha, the minimum wage and all this. No, why is Amazon paying people $15 an hour? Can't find anybody for less than that. I got to pay $15 to get somebody who can actually read a barcode and can actually put it in a box and ship it. Do you think when Henry Ford introduced the Model T, Henry Ford went out and paid his workers the unheard of sum of $2 a day when the prevailing wage was 25 cents back in the early 1900s. Prevailing wage for the typical unskilled worker in the 1900s was 25 cents. Henry Ford paid him $2 a day because Henry Ford was a friend of the working man. Hardly. If you read about what Ford did to try to keep the UAW out, it'll curl your hair. They blew guys away. They literally killed guys on their front doorstep. You know, the funny thing is, you only have to gun down a couple of guys on the front doorstep. The rest of the people decide, we don't really need that union thing. That was Henry Ford. He wasn't a friend. Why did Henry Ford pay him $2 a day? Because he was a nice guy? No. What did he get when he paid him $2 a day? People, one, who could afford to buy the cars they were producing. He got the best carpenters. He got the best sheet metal workers. He got the best mechanics in the entire city of Detroit to come to Ford Motor Company. He wasn't doing it because he was being a nice guy. He was sucking all the talent away and putting them to work for Ford Motor Company so he could make more cars. Why is Amazon paying people $15 an hour? Because we've seen the light. We believe this is what we should. This is Jeff Bezos we're talking about. The Jeff Bezos who rips people up one side down the other and belittles them publicly in meetings in front of one another. He's not doing it to be warm and fuzzy. He's doing it because I got to pay $15 to get the workforce that I want. What happens now when that spills down to every one of our organizations? So how do I keep these people when they're being poached left and right? I don't know if you're having the problem here in Orlando. We are having the problem big time in Central Illinois. Anybody who's a skilled worker, 25 cents an hour, and they're moving, and they'll keep moving. And all we're doing is bidding the wage rates up, and it's the same wage rate. What do you have to do? We've got fewer people chasing more jobs. Wages are now under pressure to be able to increase. Here's the single biggest thing I can share with you today about what you need to do about it. You can no longer provide a job. You have to provide them with an employee experience. That's what they want. We know this about millennials. We know this about the iGeners that are coming in. You've got to create an experience for them. Number one, they want to feel that the work they're doing is meaningful and having an impact. And what's scary about it is they want it to happen now. You know, you talk to them and you say, you know, how long? I've been working here 9 months. No, that's great. Good for you. Yeah, but I'm thinking of leaving. Why? I don't feel like I'm making an impact. You've been here 9 months. You know, you barely figured out where the restroom is. What do you mean you're not making an impact? Right? But that's how they feel. Right? That's what they want. That's got to be part of their experience. They want continuous feedback. You can't do quarterly reviews. You can't do annual reviews with these people. How am I doing? You better have an answer right now. How'd I do today? How'd I do on this job? How'd I do with this client? You better be able to answer that question right now. Because they want continuous feedback. That's part of their workplace experience. And they want coworkers and supervisors, I hate to tell you this, who are part of their social network. You are becoming, in the workplace, their social network. You are their neighborhood. Because at home, it's all online. At work, you are the network. You are, for most of these people, the only face-to-face social network they're going to have. So I want coworkers, I want supervisors who I get along with. If not, I'll go find somebody else. And they're doing it today. For those of us who grew up under my era, boomers, we don't get it. We were happy to have a job. That's where we are today. So if you say, what can I do about this? There's something you can actually do and take home. We've got some other tools and techniques. If you ever want a copy of it, there's my shameless plug. Just released a book in May on how to do planning for a world that's changing and in chaos with my co-author who's done this with several companies. This is the point where I'd love to tell you, here's the solution to your problem. I don't have solutions. What I'm here to do is to alert you to the challenge that we're all facing and to try to help you in the process of doing that. Just go home. I say the biggest thing I do is I want people to walk out of here going, man, I'm going to have to really think hard about what we're doing, because it ain't the same world I grew up in. If you walk out of here and you're thinking to yourself, boy, things are changing, I better get with it, then I've been successful. Thank you very much, especially to Dutch for inviting me. I'll stick around if you've got questions, you want to interact, you want to talk about this, be glad to talk with you about this stuff, because I'm living it just like you are, all right? Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Okay, everybody.